Welcome to our first of 4 Regional ACE webinars. I'm Ryan Pratt, the VP of Marketing and Research at GradLeaders. For those of you who aren't aware, GradLeaders is a relatively new brand that's the result of a merger between 2 companies, MBA Focus and CSO Research, that have been in the industry for 30+ years. Today we partner with thousands of career centers and employers who use our technology to manage the entire campus recruiting and career development process. We're excited to be partnering with all 4 regional ACEs again this year on these webinars. Quick reminder before we kick this off, everyone has been automatically muted on entry other than George, Samantha, and I. But if you have questions at any time throughout the webinar, feel free to type them into the chat window within WebEx, and please send your questions to all panelists so that George, Samantha, and I can see them. Our presenter today is George Anders. George is an editor-at-large at LinkedIn, where he writes about college-to-career issues and the future of work. He also is the author of 5 business books, including his latest, You Can Do Anything, The Surprising Power of a Useless Liberal Arts Degree. Earlier in his career, George worked as a writer, editor, bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fast Company, and Bloomberg View. In 1997, he shared in the Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting. He's a Stanford graduate with a BA in economics and a transcript that includes classes in everything from Slavic literature to Civil War history. So without further ado, George Anders, everybody.
Great. Thanks for the chance to be part of this webinar. I'm looking forward to spending an hour with you. We're going to do 3 different things today. I'm going to start by sharing some big picture data that I think redefines the landscape for people with liberal arts degrees. Some of it presents opportunity, a few pieces present challenges, but we'll go through the overview, and in the process I'll also tell you how I came to write this book and get a little bit of a sense of the background and the perspective that I bring. In the middle part, we're going to roll up our sleeves and spend some time looking in detail about what's working and what's broken on the college to career pathway. From my Wall Street Journal days, I have the habit of going out with a notebook and talking to anyone who's got a perspective and then trying to do my best to synthesize. So I'll have a lot to share for you. There'll be a 5-circle diagram, and we'll look at the interplay of 5 different forces. And then I want to clear out enough time at the end that we can have a very engaged Q&A session. We've got a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise in the room here, and I want to give you a chance to bring up topics that are top of mind for you, perspectives that you've got, things that you heard that may be either confirming or contradictory with what you come in expecting, and we'll cut loose until they ring the time bell. So off we go. Let's start with slide 1, which shows us the big picture and the road to this book. So if we turn the clock back to 2013, one of the things that really got me pointed in the direction that became this book was looking at the intense amount of attention there was towards STEM careers. And at that time, there were a lot of calls from all levels of government of get people into coding camps. There is no future but coding. It's either software or pouring coffee. And some of the rhetoric got overheated and sometimes even got silly, but it also tended to be discouraging for people who felt there was another direction to go. And yet when you look at the data, the pie chart here shows us Bureau of Labor Statistics data. Only 6% of new job creation was coming in, the core information technology fields. 94% was coming from people who were doing something other than learning to write code or service computers or operate networks or the like. And this just seemed to be a ridiculous imbalance, that we were focusing on 6% of the opportunities, we were ignoring 94%. I thought, let me get to work on shining the light on that big orange circle that no one else is talking about. As I looked at some of the detailed work telling us why computer science was going to be so important, some of the early estimates, particularly, next slide, a study out of Oxford University was claiming 47% of our jobs were going to be obliterated by information technology, robots, software, and the like. That's a study that's pretty much been abandoned and let go of, but somehow that 47% number still rattles around. A lot of it was based on the belief that fields like financial planning would be completely turned over to computers. And the reality, of course, is you need people to interact with people. It's not enough just to hand out the numbers, whether you're in finance, whether you're in medicine. The human dimension is huge. And as I looked at, again, Bureau of Labor Statistics job projections, it seemed that there was a whole second story that wasn't getting talked about the importance of empathy. And a lot of the fast-growing jobs, whether they were physical therapists, coaches, people in the helping professions, tended to rely very heavily on empathy. So I wrote a piece about this, and I did something that I'd never done in nearly 30 years of journalism before. I illustrated it with a cat picture. And to some extent, I'm going to apologize for that because there's nothing more clickbaity than a cat picture, but I figure after several decades of playing it straight, I'm allowed one cat picture in my life. And the result, of course, was we got more than 1 million page views, and it was one of the 3 or 4 most talked about stories of the year on that site. I'm willing to discount half of my readers on the belief that they came for the cats and either did or didn't stay for the article. But even if you talk me down to 500,000 readers or 250,000 readers, there are a lot of people that were ready for the message that the #1 job skill in 2020 is going to be empathy. Next slide. So what I hit was the key insight that ultimately drove this book, and that is that our future involves doing what machines can't. And the 3 elements that I come back to again and again are curiosity, creativity, and empathy. Machines aren't curious. They'll run numbers, but they don't have that human desire to explore and find out the unfamiliar. And an awful lot of job growth involves trying things that hadn't been done before. Creativity, the same thing, that I see efforts to teach artificial intelligence systems how to come up with names of paint. This is a pretty standard exercise. People come up with wonderful ones. If you go to Benjamin Moore or the other major paint stores, they've got beautiful ways of getting you excited about paint. You ask a machine to do it, and it comes up with a shade of brown that it calls deep purdly. And I don't think that's going to put a lot of designers out of business. So curiosity, creativity, empathy, that's our future, and I've illustrated it with the designer here who's busy trying to make something look good and who's got an aesthetic sense. And you're probably drawing the connection yourself. If you want to have a good sense of aesthetics, liberal arts education is a good place to start. So forward the clock to 2015. And one of the things I was doing fairly actively then was writing major features for Forbes, including cover stories. And I came to them and I said, all of the tech companies that are getting cited as examples of why tech is taking over the world, I've been looking at their job sites and their job ads, and they are advertising for far more people in sort of connecting humanistic fields, whether it's sales, marketing, customer success. They don't need that many engineers. The engineers can get the work done with really small teams. They need a lot of people to get out and sell the message. So I think my showcase example was OpenTable, which is the restaurant reservation company. A lot of their business is selling data back to restaurants that'll tell them, hey, you've got a big hole in your Tuesday evening list. You need to do some promotions. It only takes some 10 data scientists to do that for 30,000 restaurants across the U.S. The numbers crunch fast. But they need more than 100 people to go out with iPads and that genial style of conversation that'll get a restaurant manager's attention, and then to implement it. And as I look, what are the majors from these people? These are jobs for English majors, philosophy majors, psych majors, what have you. So this turned into a cover story for Forbes. That good-looking man is Stuart Butterfield, who runs Slack, a messaging company that's become very popular. He has a philosophy degree. And in Forbes' best fashion, I'm bashful, but my editors at Forbes are not. We declared the liberal arts degree to be the new golden ticket. And, once again, a tremendous outpouring of readership and engagement. Next slide. So just to recap, here are 3 of the people who are in the story. All of them have liberal arts degrees. And it was really around this point where I realized, okay, my entry point was the future of work, but this connects so much to education and to this overlooked population of people who actually do have the right degrees to succeed in these jobs, and no one else is talking about it. Next slide. So in fact, if you look here, this was sort of the catalyst that said, I don't just have a magazine article here. I've got a book that needs to be written and an idea that needs to get shared on a larger scale. And what you'll notice in the individual tweets and Facebook shares and the like is, what I refer to a sentiment of people who are proud, bruised, and vindicated. And for them, this is sort of a story that they latch onto, that they share, that, in some cases, people in their 20s were sending their parents of, look, Mom and Dad, I am legitimate. So, yay for English majors. This is my life. Please read this. It rings true. Useless speaks to me. So much love for this. That useless liberal arts, hottest ticket. So, very gratifying for me, but also a reminder that there's a big population here that hasn't found its anthem, that hasn't found its calling message, and there's a role for me to play to step in and do this. Next slide. So to recap what I've been telling you, the surprise for me was, one, that there was this marvelous pathway in the economy, but also that the messaging that we've been getting about how to get yourself a safe, secure job was so tied into other types of degrees that the people I was writing about felt like fugitives sneaking into jobs that they enjoyed. And so, I have 3 examples that all come from the book. We have an English major who ends up on a data team at a major ad and public relations agency. And as she explains it, that's Nikelia Henderson there. Her job is to tell stories with numbers. And the numbers are not that hard to crunch out via the software. You need some storytelling skill to connect with clients, connect with customers. The middle guy in the picture, Josh Sucher, he's an anthropology major, and I remember pulling up a 2004 career guide that said anthropology and archaeology were the 2 most impractical majors, and there was really no one in business that directly wanted to use them, and you could go to graduate school and get yourself a law degree or something and then find work. But outside of the university, there were no jobs for anthropologists. That might have been true in 2004. It's not true now. What we see instead is that an awful lot of consumer-facing technology companies need to get their user experience right. They need to understand why people click on some things and don't on others, why they come back to visit the site again. And it's essential to find people who are trained in drawing out the public's quirky, hard to express, but terribly decisive preferences. Who knows how to do that? It's those anthropology guys. They, instead of picking over pots and looking at sort of courtship rituals in Guatemalan villages, they're going into artist communities and, the shopping habits of affluent single people or married couples and what have you. And, when I interviewed Josh, he was a user experience specialist. He's now a user experience director. That anthro degree is working out. And then lots of examples of philosophy as well as an in-field. So, just to bear this out, the next slide makes my closing point on this section. And that is, I stumbled into something much bigger than I expected. I've spent a lot of years writing medium important stories, and every now and then there's a sense of catching that big wave, and this was a big wave. So off I went to try and do the best job I could of filling out the details from these earlier works and sort of extending it into what could we say about how to not just identify this interesting college to career pathway, but to build it up, to make it work more effectively, to figure out where the speed bumps were that were preventing this from working on the scale it should, and to make sure that I documented this with enough broad, comprehensive data that it wasn't just a collection of people who, reached out to me on Twitter, but it was something that was genuinely happening. So, next slide. So what's the empathy sector? I went through, again, Bureau of Labor Statistics data and looked at job projections from 2014 to 2024. The national average is that we'll add somewhere between 6 and 7% of jobs across industries. And this slide picks out a variety of fields where the job growth is expected to be at least triple that. And you're going to see some, just pure STEM jobs there, statisticians, web developers, but you're also going to see a lot of things that connect the analytical side with the humanistic side. I already mentioned financial advisors. That's got a growth rate of close to 30% a year. Turns out you need people to talk to people about money. You can't just run it all with drop-down menus and clickable buttons. Genetic counselors, the same thing. We have an astonishing amount of information that we can pick out of people's DNA now, and that's only going to increase. But when we're talking about diseases and health issues that could affect the rest of your life, you don't just want a printout. You want someone to talk to about it. And it turns out this is a great field for psychology majors who understand enough of the life sciences and can get up to speed on the core science, but who understand the person on the other side of the table, the desk, or the exam room. So, even web developers, that if you think about that, so much of doing development right is understanding your user. This is not writing 100,000 lines of code to run a check processing system. This is figuring out how to create something elegant and fun that works on our phone. And that requires a sense of aesthetics, a sense of humanistics. In fact, one of the examples I ran across was the guy at Facebook who designed their like button, and he turns out to be a music major from Duke. How do you get the aesthetic to get something that simple and catchy and appealing? A field that's far away from tech and takes you more into aesthetics turns out to be a good place. So this reassured me a lot. I felt there was an empathy sector out there, and when I looked at the numbers, there was indeed. Next slide. So I tend to explain things in words of 1, 2, and 3 syllables, but they're from my old major of economics. There are people who can explain this in bigger words than me. And here we have David Autor, who actually is quite a deep thinker on economics. He's a professor at MIT. And he's got a reason why, even as we bring more technology into society, we're creating more jobs for the English, psych, sociology majors that I was showing before. And this quote's from one of his papers. Cheap computing power amplifies the comparative advantage of problem-solving skills, adaptability, and creativity. So what are we getting at? We're getting at that same sense of we're going to beat the machines, or we're going to find interesting and exciting jobs, not by trying to emulate what technology can do, but by taking advantage of the opportunities it creates for your choice of problem-solving, adaptability, and creativity, or curiosity, creativity, and empathy. We're heading into the same zone. We're looking at things that have traditionally been labeled as soft skills, and now they start to become much more crucial skills. Let's spend a couple more slides on the macro picture, because this will underscore the fact that there's a big opportunity here, and then we'll start to get into the nitty-gritty. So if we look at the overall U.S. economy, and this is data going back to the early 1980s, 4 different kinds of jobs, either routine or non-routine, either cognitive or manual. And it's no surprise that the non-routine cognitive stuff has had the fastest growth and probably also the strongest income. The big surprise is that the routine work, no matter whether it's brain power work or manual labor work, there's no job growth there. Those are the kinds of things that get automated, and we're not just talking about the payroll clerk. We're talking about a lot of other jobs that just can be done better by machine. So the key lesson, moving into non-routine, is crucial. And let's take a look at that in a more graphic form. Next slide. So if you look on the left, the text redrawing the line between secure and imperiled jobs. 20th century division was cognitive versus manual. Manual is high school degree or less. Cognitive is college education. And the assumption was go to college, earn more. That is still largely true, but as we look at what's happening now, we're starting to get a second theme, which again is this notion that the routine work, loan processing, and that's listed as one of the most endangered fields. And that traditionally has been a nice area to go into, but that really can be done mechanically. The non-routine side, the creativity fields, and even on the manual labor side, the ones that involve high human touch, and almost anything that goes on in a hospital at all income levels speaks to that sense of non-routine. Those are the opportunities. And where do you get the skills that are going to help you be effective in a non-routine world? A lot of the classic humanities and social sciences fields. You're getting your arms around problems that are unique, that are intractable, that have many competing forces. At age 18, 19, or 20, you're getting used to thinking in a world that is unpredictable and getting up to speed again and again in new areas. So next slide. The big question, and we'll dive into this more in a moment, is whether employers get it. At the very highest levels, I hear a lot of messages from CEOs that they are looking for people who have the kind of skills we've been talking about. This is Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, and I was at one of his speeches last month, and he was saying it's better to be a learn-it-all than a know-it-all. And again, playing to that sense of coming out of college with an ability to pick up new fields, having done that again and again, rather than being a single subject expert in a world where that could become obsolete. Next slide. So now we're going to start to get more specific. One of the things I did in the book was to sit down with Indeed.com and all of its job listings across the country and do a two-subject filter. I wanted to see jobs that asked for critical thinking, and I wanted to see jobs that paid at least $100,000, figuring that if you've gone to all the trouble of gaining critical thinking skills, you might as well get a position that has enough authority and enough plain old pay that you know that was worth it. So what are those kinds of companies looking for? And this is everyone from Allstate to Apple. It's the Department of Labor to various nonprofits. It's a wide swath of desired employers. I found 5 things that tended to cluster in these ads. First was people who are willing to tackle uncharted areas. I think of that as second nature. It's kind of the world that I've lived in, but it's good to remember when we do aggregate studies, about 2/3 of people would rather be in a field where everything is pretty closely defined and they don't have to go explore. And then 1/3 of people do, and that's a strength for these kinds of jobs. Second and third areas, being first rate at gathering data and insights, and being really good at solving complex problems. These are skills that you can get in pretty much across the board in college, and I'm not going to argue that liberal arts does it better than the engineering school or the business school. In fact, I think some of those are core strengths that help explain why engineering and business school graduates get paid quite well and find jobs quickly. The business world needs people with those aspects of critical thinking. But the last 2 are ones where the liberal arts background really starts to click in. The first is what I'm going to call being highly skilled at reading the room, understanding other people, being able to knit together consensus, knowing how to work with competing factions. You see that in a lot of higher level leadership positions, and you also see it in jobs like the project manager, the case director, a lot of these connective jobs on large teams where you need someone that can take all of this talent that's in danger of running in different directions and stepping on itself and make sure that the whole system works. You see that an awful lot in political and large organizations as well. Often it's the difference between people who are promoted to one level of supervisory work and people who can rise much higher. And you're going to get that from, whether it's a classics course looking at Athens versus Sparta and understanding why they came at the world differently, or a sociology class that looks at different treatment strategies to try and keep drug addicts from sliding back into the problems that hope to solve. Again, humanities and social sciences are a great place to learn how to read the room. And then finally, the ability to persuade and inspire people. We have a fairly demoralized workforce in America. There's Gallup data showing that only about 30–35% of people are truly engaged in their work. And I'm sure everyone can think of a customer service encounter within the last 48 hours where the kindest way to describe it is that person was not very engaged in their job. And to succeed in any leadership position, you need to be able to reach people who are on that dividing line between do I care, do I not care, and bring them on board. And that's become a much more valuable skill and more essential, that we're past the stage where we can use carrots and sticks and the threat of firing people and the like. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not, and it's never a great way to run an organization. So again, these last 2 areas, strengths of the liberal arts community. But one more slide to come, and this is the big but. Not every liberal arts grad or liberal arts student is ready to jump into this exciting world. Not everyone shows well, not everyone has the presentation skills. A lot of people end up in college and don't graduate. There are a million ways to go off track. And for better or worse, the stereotype of the messy dorm room tends to be in a lot of employers' minds, and it's hard to fight. I'm the parent of 2 people who have just headed off to college. This is not either of their rooms, but whichever way you stand on this divide, I feel your pain. Okay, so now we are ready to get to work on part 2, what's working and what's broken on the college to career pathway. And this is my metaphor for it. We have what's actually a very excellent road. If you look off into the distance, it's flat and it's in good shape. If you look in the foreground right up to where it gets bad, it's very good. And then somewhere in the middle, we have a complete cave-in that makes it impossible to go from A to B. And I have to say, this reminds me an awful lot of what I encounter as we look at the college to career pathway. There's a lot of great work being done in colleges and universities to prepare late adolescents for exciting roles in adult life, to stretch their minds, to get them involved in activities both in the classroom and the clubs and the like. And I'm a big fan of the way we do it in the U.S. I've lived in a couple other countries where they have a much more vocational tracked approach to college, and you don't get all of the things we get in the U.S. I think we've got something great here. That said, the connection to getting that nice job can get very bumpy, especially for people with non-technical degrees. So there's a mix of good news and bad news here. A lot of people find their way anyway. Somehow they get through that bumpy zone. This is a chart from Williams College. It's complex and the writing is small, but let me take you through it. And hopefully the key thing you'll get is the sense of connections that go everywhere. And now let me explain to you what we've got. So on the left-hand side, we've got 3 major types of majors, and they're all sorted out, one by one. The blue are the arts majors. The orange are the social science majors, and the green are the tech majors. So we've got languages and English up in blue. We've got ethnic studies, history, political science in the orange, and we've got biology, chemistry, the like in the green. And then on the right-hand side are, oh my goodness, close to 20 different directions that people can go with those degrees. And it's law, it's sales, it's teaching, it's finance, it's, it goes on and on. And what you really need to see is that each of the streamers can connect on almost any direction. There's not one dominant pathway to look at here. So, good news, you can take that degree and end up in all kinds of places with it. I'm not sure if we make it easy for that to happen, and in some cases we make it unnecessarily hard or difficult. So let's take a look at a couple more slides. So the good news is, again, what Williams' data goes from 1935 to the present day. It's the best data set I've found that aggregates over time and that shows a single college's perspective, but we're not all Williams, and what worked in 1935 is kind of irrelevant to what works today. So let me give you a different set of data. This is quite fresh. This is from the Brookings Institution and their research arm that's called the Hamilton Project. They pulled census and IRS data and paired it up to keep track of what majors people had and then what careers they ended up in eventually. I think they have some OEDS data as well. Anyway, it's a very nifty pairing and tracked more than 1 million people in it. So what do we see here? We see that for the core vocational majors, you major in the subject, you get a job in the field. That's how it works. So a nursing degree is probably the most intense. Most people who get nursing degrees become RNs and work as RNs. The rest of them probably have RNs and are just working in various management or project jobs in hospitals or social service agencies. Accounting has that same kind of pull as well. But when we get to all of the traditional arts and sciences degrees, it's quite remarkable how much people scatter. And if you look at physics, the most common field for a physics degree is to end up in some form of software. 18% of physics majors do that, but the other 82% do something different. English majors, we always think of that as a field that leads to teaching, but actually that's true for only about 18%, and I've added up here the primary school teachers, the high school teachers, the people who are teaching at other levels as well. You'll see a lot of English majors end up in law, they'll end up in writing, they'll end up in sales, they'll end up in other fields. And then the data for history and chem majors speaks for itself. So we've got this mobility. I think of it as an asset, but I'm not sure everyone else does. Let's go to the next slide. So when people actually do this mobility, now I'm back to the people who feel like fugitives, who have a hard time getting the rest of the world to embrace their journey of discovery. And this is Polly Washburn, who is an Oberlin graduate. She's in the book in, I believe, chapter 10, and she's tried everything. And it's been a good run for her. I mean, she's, consistently been well paid in a variety of specialties. They sound different: legal researcher, journalist, filmmaker, web developer, digital producer. But if you think about them, they all draw on some of the same skills and ability to make a project come together, to do a lot of those things that were on my 5 skills slide. She's good at going into uncharted areas. She can find the insights she needs from her legal researcher days, or her, she solves problems. She's good at connecting people. She's persuasive. And, you can always find work with those. It may be in a different field from time to time. It just needs to come together the way that works for you. So again, one of the reasons to write the book is to try and legitimize this type of career path, to give it a respectability and even a cachet that it might not have in some circles today, and to give people the confidence to embark on that kind of life. So when I get out and talk about the book, one of the things I found, whether it's with parent groups or with faculty or with employers, people come away feeling that there's more opportunity than they thought. There's more to feel good about and less to worry about. And I think a lot of changes start with the change in mindset. So anything I can do to help people realize those opportunities is a point of pride and satisfaction. But as I say, we're not totally there yet. So let's go to the next slide. So this is my 5-element ecosystem. And what do we have here? We have colleges at the top. It rotates through students, so what I'm going to call social capital, more on that later, employers, and parents. And for us to improve, we must change habits in 5 key areas. These are the 5 ones. And if we look at each of the roles on the college to career pathway, there's, let's call them speed bumps. So let's get started on them. The first one, and this is something that I hear from career services managers and executives and frontline coaches at pretty much every school I visit. We've got a well-built pathway for people in technical fields where there are large employers with predictable hiring needs that will come to campus every year. If you've got an accounting degree, we can set up the job fairs that will bring Deloitte and PwC and Accenture and all, whether it's the consulting side or the accounting side. You can steer people into those, and people sign up, and the ritual is fairly clear. And it's not that different from what you did to do well in college, and that works. And you can place a lot of people that way. But it's much harder to know what to do with the people who've got non-technical degrees in fields where the employers are smaller, where there's a lot more just-in-time hiring, where job specs are hazier, and the amount of time necessary to get them to come to a job fair, to have a coherent ask of students, to be able to explain what they want, to get the right person there, it's just a mismatch. It's hard to make it work. And in fact, part of the reason I'm doing this today is that Eilish at Ball State had put me onto some of her own graduate school research in this area, and she found that students in the sciences and professional fields were quite happy with the career service advice they got. Students in the humanities tended not to come into the career service office, and if they did at all, they felt kind of frustrated. That's not because career services officers aren't doing their job. You're doing an extraordinary job with limited resources. It's just that in many cases there isn't the budget to sit down and work with students one by one by one. So what do we do? Next slide, please. Key statistic, this comes out of University of Chicago research. 42% of jobs are filled without any trace of a job ad. So, and many of you know this, there's a whole second market in how jobs get filled that involves much more of an informal back and forth between candidates who aren't yet candidates, excuse me, and employers who don't even know they're hiring, but somehow a little bit of banter here, a little bit of what if there, and the next thing you know, a job's been, there's a handshake on a job without any trace of a job ad. And the metaphor here is the guy who's jumped the fence. A lot of people get hired by jumping the fence. I've jumped a few in my day too, and it's nice. I mean, it's exciting when you find someone, but it's very much getting hired by osmosis. It's not the classic thing of typing up your resume and going and sitting down in the cubicle to do the job interview on hiring day. So we need to figure out a way to work with that. And in fact, the image on the slide before, let's just go back one for a moment. I tell a long and charming story in the book, which I will now condense down to about 2 sentences. This is Kaori Freda. She is a Reed graduate. She had an interdisciplinary major and ended up after graduation going to the Kurosawa Islands, also known as the Bonin Islands, off Japan. Even about as far off the grid as you can get. Her major was impractical, and she wanted to get a job. And amazingly enough, thanks to an online network of Reed alumni, she got connected with the right person at Nike and was able to sit in a termite-infested hut, Skype with the guy, and convince him that she was the right person to hire for Nike, and off she went. I share her story because it's entertaining, but I also share it because it speaks to the power of new connective tools, whether it's Skype or WhatsApp or other ways of connecting, and the power of recent alumni to help build those sorts of networking connections that can get someone who didn't come to the job fair to still find a good job. So now we can skip ahead back to where we would have been otherwise. There we go. So this is something, again, that many of us know or suspect, but I've got fresh data for you, and I'd like to share it. So Lever Inc., which is a HR technology firm, looked through 4 million job actions and classified the odds of winning a job by sending in a resume versus having a referral. And the numbers are right there for you. The resume, 1 of every 152 resume submissions leads to a job. That's pretty miserable odds. And for all the students who've sent in 20, 30, 40, 50 resumes and haven't hit the jackpot yet and are wondering that the employment world doesn't love them and that they'll never get a job, the answer is no, they're quite likely to get a job. They're just not very likely to get it this way. So what does work? Having someone who can vouch for you, having someone who knows you, has seen you, has a sense of how you work and what your values are and what your ambitions are, and can point you toward an opportunity. And on referrals, 1 of every 16 referrals leads to a job. These are formally tracked referrals within companies' employment systems. We can argue whether the odds get even better or worse if we look at ones that are informal. But I think the basic point is powerful, that the more we can do during the college years to help students connect with the kinds of people who can give them those referrals, the happier their experience is going to be in getting hired. Next slide. So a model that I like a lot, and many of you are probably already either using this or experimenting with something similar. For liberal arts students, 30% of the time spent researching job opportunities, 60% of the time meeting people, often through events that can be organized either by departments or by alumni or somehow outsourced other people who can extend the career services department's reach. And then once those connections are made, the last 10% is shipping resumes, but it's sending them to warm leads where there's already a level of interest and perhaps even an ability to find the job together. Next slide. So here we get to the parallel message for students and grads that a lot of times you're going to need to invent the job yourself. It will not be already posted. And I think we have a problem because so many of the academic jobs that the individual professors know well are posted and are well described, and the assumption is the business world must work somewhat similarly. It doesn't. A great deal of hiring is ad hoc, particularly at smaller organizations, particularly at nonprofits. But also even in large corporate settings that people sort of, get into jobs almost by osmosis. So I share several detailed stories in the book about them, partly because they're fun and partly because they're meant to be inspirational and instructive for people who are going, how do I make this work? How do I create my own job? Next slide, please. So here's Milan Garcia. Her full story was excerpted in the Atlantic. And if you search with either her name or my name in Atlantic, you can get it. It's worth reading in detail because it's a lovely example of someone who started with a community college degree in sociology, not an instant path to a great job. She is now head of digital community initiatives for the city of Oakland. She's the one who makes sure that websites work for people who either need to do jury duty or pay traffic tickets or report potholes or all the different things you need to do in the city. And her ability to understand people and group dynamics and the the marginalization of some communities and the way power is held by others makes her incredibly effective, and then she's picked up just enough tech along the way that she also is a master of all the digital elements. So if you're wondering how do you go from a community college with a sociology degree to a great cutting-edge job in a big city that gives you a compensation package of north of $100,000, she's the example, and it's there for free. You know, buy the book if you want. I hope some of you do, but I want to make a lot of this material available free, and that is a great story to share with any students who are trying to figure out how do I get from here to there. It's on theatlantic.com, and search with her name and mine, and you'll have it. Next slide. So I'd mentioned social capital. One of the things that I hear from a lot of university leaders is as we look at how America's demographics are changing, the next generations of college students are going to come from a much wider background than the ones that have to date. We're going to admit a lot of people who do not have parents and grandparents that went to college. We're going to admit people who do not have an uncle in LA with an extra bedroom if you want to go try and crack into the entertainment business. We'll have people who can contribute a great deal but do not start out with the kinds of connections that make it easier to turn a liberal arts degree into a successful career. So there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of trying to augment people's social capital, setting up networks. I'll save this for Q&A because some of you probably have specific programs that you're doing or specific questions, but I want to put down the marker that the liberal arts degree works well for people who have sufficient connections and are not burdened with so much debt that they have to max out their earnings, you know, in the first few months after college, or else they'll fall behind on loan payments. There's a lot that can be done here. There's a lot that needs to be done. Next slide. So key area, and I've cited examples of CEOs who are excited about the kinds of skills that I described, who are opening the door wider for liberal arts majors and people with broader non-traditional backgrounds. I've got one more here. This is the head of edX, which is a big online learning hub and a professor of electrical engineering. He's a big fan of soft skills. I don't know when we get down to the front lines of hiring whether that message is getting through or whether there's a feeling of, yeah, these are nice to have, but the must-haves tend to be technical skills. I'm going to keep writing and crusading on this, but I'd love to get your feedback too. Has the employer community got the message? And if not, how close or how far are we from having that sink in? Next slide. So the last of my 5 circles is parents. And I'd been told by a middle school principal once that there are really only 2 styles of parenting, the parents who do too much and the parents who do too little. And I wish we weren't that cynical. I wish, you know, just speaking as someone who, you know, did my best to get the hang of parenting, it'd be nice to be in the middle, but a lot of times it's perilous. I put up this slide because I want to talk about parents who overplan, who run too much for their children. I see this more at the types of school districts that invite me to come in and talk. But the metaphor that I'd like to leave you with is too often we think of sorting our way through careers as being on a tightrope. You make one mistake and you fall into that terrible valley, never to be seen again. And in fact, I would argue that yes, you know, people in their late teens and early 20s are moving through space in exciting and unpredictable ways, but it's much more of a trampoline than a tightrope. And there's the ability first to fall and live to tell of it, but also to fall and bounce back up, and sometimes to use the misstep of a short-lived job that didn't work out to gain skills or gain clarity about what you want to do. And, you know, once you pick yourself up, you're actually stronger and better. So, you know, the Polly Washburn slide was meant to convey that message. It's okay and sometimes even really clever to cycle through a variety of jobs and kind of hone skills at each one. And this is just a metaphor to try and bring it into whatever conversations you may have willingly or unwilling with the parent community. So again, a lot of the reason why I did this was to build the intellectual case for why a liberal arts degree is not just relevant, but essential in the current job market, but also just to get people more confident. Next slide. We need a CanDo Spirit. If people are lethargic and stuck in that messy dorm room, none of this is going to happen. And again, I've just tried to offer as many possible models as I can. The one lighthearted note I want to close on is whatever else you think of social media, it has been a full employment act for English majors. And all of those, clever tweets and Facebook marketing campaigns and the like are a haven for people with a creative knack. If you make it to chapter 6 of the book, Andy Anderegg's story of how she became the email muse at Groupon is very entertaining. That's my big picture. My final thought, last slide, is that we often spend a lot of time asking what can go wrong, but sometimes we need to ask what can go right. I've included my email here and also how to get to the website that'll tell you more about the book and give you more free content if you'd like. Please feel free to follow up. We'll have a little bit of time now for questions, but I'm accessible and available, and if there's something that you want to confer with me on your own, you've got the address, george.anders@gmail, and I'll look forward to hearing from you. And now let's go to questions.
Thanks, George. A reminder to everybody to use the chat functionality in WebEx, not the Q&A functionality, which I know is confusing, but use the chat so you can send it to both George and I so we can both see your questions. It looks like we did have a couple questions entered there during your presentation, George. The first one is, what's your best advice in communicating the transferable skills gained via a liberal arts degree to an employer? Are there any specific keywords or experiences that you should highlight?
So the more you can get into resilience, the sense that you can bounce back, you can get into showing initiative. I've done a bunch of brown bag events with students, and I find a lot of times if they've done overseas programs, that sense of I can figure out what to do in a chaotic environment is quite valuable, and people are willing to extrapolate. I mean, if you were able to, something as simple as get a product launched in China when you got locked out of your room and the print shop wasn't working. The employers are looking for people who don't have to be micromanaged, who can go in useful places. Even people who talk there, and there's a nice post up of a woman who ended up with an investment banking job because she told a story of how she convinced her professor to sign on for a thesis idea that he originally thought was horrible. And she said, it's not horrible, it's important, here's what I did. And she showed enough passion and energy that it clicked. Resilience and grit, these are great traits for a lot of reasons, including the fact that they've become very popularized and very discussed. And I think just liberal arts students end up having great examples. So aim for that, show an ability to adapt and innovate. Persuasive communication. And if you've got a story of people that came around to your way of thinking, there's actually an example in chapter 2 of a woman who did a classics degree, and they ended up roaming through parts of ancient Greece, and they had each student explain something. And she had such a compelling presentational style that a bunch of Australian tourists started tagging along behind her, convinced that she was an official guide. And she told that to one of the big consulting groups. They go, we put people in front of clients all the time, and we're looking for people who, think about it. So much of management consulting is just trying to convince people that you've got more than you do. So if you can fake your way into being a tour guide, you can fake your way into being a strategic consultant. I'm being a little whimsical, but I think those are some of the ways you can use strengths. I just saw another question light up. What have we got?
Yeah, we have quite a few questions here. We got about 10 minutes, so we'll get through as many of these as possible. Here's a quick one I think you can answer, George. Somebody's just looking for where they can find that Milan Garcia story again. Can you remind them?
Yes, so if you go to theatlantic.com and you put in either my name or her name, you should be able to find it quite quickly.
Okay. We will go find that and maybe tweet it out from our account too, so if that helps, we'll put it there as well. Another question, there's been a significant increase in the number of students accessing mental health services on campus. Does your book address how this might impact the employability of liberal arts majors?
So I believe that our health records do not need to be made public. I don't think employers are allowed to ask about that. I would much rather see students who are feeling, blue, unsteady, what have you, feel that they can turn to a professional in a confidential environment and choose whatever path helps them get to a more stable place than to ever feel that this would be a black mark with an employer. In fact, I think there've got to be ways that you can get pretty quick relief if anyone starts to ask about such things. Yeah, and to deal with the implicit question, interviews are a little bit of a stage performance. You need to come in energetic and upbeat. But I think hopefully a peer group, friends, support group, recent alumni, career services counselors can help students get to that stage where they're ready for the audition and they're able to make the most of it if it goes well and not plunged into despair if it doesn't. But yeah, I think what students do to sort out health issues of any kind should be private.
Thanks, George. Here's another question. For students who are undecided about what area they're going to go into, what suggestions do you give them so that they don't end up taking a shotgun approach?
So I think in a lot of cases what really helps is meeting your tribe of people. And I've had people tell me, and each person varies, when I met people who'd worked at the State Department, I knew I wanted to be in diplomacy or international relations. When I met lawyers, I liked the way they argued. I wanted to get in a field where I could get paid for arguing. And I think it's really hard just skimming web pages and looking at course descriptions that there's that personal connection. So the more that there are events at Canvas that bring clusters of people in a field and sort of a student professional mixer, that's the easiest way to establish it. And then you've got a model in your mind, and hopefully you've even got someone that you're in email contact with who will keep explaining to you what you can do in that field. But I think to try and choose it abstractly, there's a reason why when we look for life companions, you can do a little bit of browsing on the internet, but in the end it's going to be how you get along in person that determines it. And choosing a career is potentially a 40-year commitment too. So the more that can be done on campus to arrange chances for people to, meet the government people, meet the medicine people, meet the folks in finance. And I can even tell sometimes with students, once you talk to them for a little bit, I go, you know what, you must be a finance person. And we haven't talked about money or the economy, but there's just an analytical approach where you go, okay, you're doing the cost-benefit analysis, you're doing the numbers, that's just how you think. And those kind of encounters, I think the more you can make them happen or encourage them to happen, the less time people spend in undecided land.
Here's another question from the higher ed side of our audience. Somebody just wants to know, how do we best market our liberal arts programs to first-generation college students?
So a lot of first-gen students come in with a passion to make a difference. And I think the more that can be done to show that these kinds of degrees get you there. And psychology actually has surprisingly high enrollment among first-gen students. I think it tends to be a more common major than among people who have families with multi-generation history. And psychology is a passport into helping people in need, helping people in crisis. So, yeah, being able to tie it not just to the cerebral side, but also to the sense of, political science. This is a field that if you want to go into government, if you want to be the mayor of a community that needs good government, and every community does, these are useful fields. But I think connecting them to how to solve social problems.
Here's a related question, George. For first-generation college students, how do we encourage risk-taking and experimentation in their job search when they don't have the safety net that others have?
So here's where I think mentoring can be tremendously valuable. And one of the things that I hear when I talk to first-gen students is I feel alone. I don't feel there's anyone else like me. So in the book, I actually showcase a program that's going at Rutgers and San Jose State that connects a lot of early career managers at companies, generally people of color, with students of color. And then the sense is, okay, this is someone like me. I could travel the same path they've done. This seems accessible. But I think unmentored, the worry is that, wow, it's a big, challenging world. I don't quite know what they expect of me. So I think building those kinds of personal connections tends to be crucial. And, it needs to come at a measured stage. I mean, you know, as much as we lionize risk-taking, we're really lionizing risks that work out, or risks that didn't cause us any real pain. And trying to make too big a leap too early can be quite painful. So start with smaller things, and then, you know, as the network builds out, the risks will seem less risky.
We have a few more minutes. We'll try and squeeze in a couple more questions here. We have an attendee who's the chair of an English department, and they want to know, what role do faculty play in this? My faculty want to focus on their content and don't feel qualified as career advisors.
So for faculty who've lived mostly in academia, who are a little bewildered about what is going on out there, or who just for their own reasons came to a university to do research, building bridges with recent alumni can still be a useful, low-stress way of doing it. And you don't necessarily want them to know everything about what's available in technical writing and social media, and if that's not an area of interest to them, they won't help on the placements. But they should know where their A students have gone, and even their more eccentric and lovable B students. And I don't think it's too much to ask them to do a little bit of outreach to the people who they had in senior or junior year seminars, keep them in the mix, and to serve as brokers who can say, oh, you ought to talk to Claudia, or you ought to talk to Josh or someone. They were one of my favorite students 2 years ago. Here's their email. Either contact them directly or I'll do an intro. But in the end, recent grads will have better advice about the job market, and it doesn't take long for the faculty to bridge. Let me just share one more technique that Binghamton does, which I think is just absolutely brilliant. They have an awards ceremony every year for faculty that have done something extra to help students get their career on track. They have a formal nomination process, and the number of people nominated who get the awards is quite high. I won't say exactly how high it is, but it's high. And the result is this becomes a badge that a lot of professors are proud to have won. And once you have 3 or 4 people in the department who've won it, the ones who haven't won it yet will start thinking about what they need to do to win it. So, you know, use recent alumni, and then use the thrill of recognition as a way of making this seem like something that's important.
All right, I think we got time for one final question, then I will go back a slide so that you have George's contact info so that you can follow up with him directly for any questions that didn't get answered. The last question is, so how do we educate employers more about the skills of liberal arts students?
I've been trying to make progress on this for about a decade. In fact, the previous book I did was called The Rare Find, and while I didn't fully realize it at the time, I was arguing for the value of the jagged resume candidate as people who've done a lot of different things that don't necessarily fit together, but who bring a lot of energy and imagination, and that is our classic liberal arts major a few years out of school. This one's going to be a longer fight. But I think the more we can shine the light on companies that do it well, I mean, I showcase Morningstar, the Chicago investment research company that just loves to hire liberal arts grads, and they have a very inventive culture. They manage to get into new business areas faster than their competition. And I think a lot of that comes from turning loose all these philosophy majors and English literature majors who are just willing to think in new directions. So I'm trying. I can't move the entire Fortune 500 in, you know, 1 book or 2 books, but I think sort of singling out examples, identifying companies where there are liberal arts majors who've traveled this path themselves and risen high, and kind of encouraging them to evangelize. Because once the company's seen that it's worked on a big scale, and a senior vice president or a COO or someone has come from that background, they go, oh, pattern matching, we should do more of that. So hopefully the momentum will build, and I'm in the fight for you.
Thanks, George. So there were a lot of questions we didn't get to. The slide that's up right now has George's email address, george.anders@gmail.com. If we didn't get your question answered, feel free to reach out to George, and he'll try and respond to those in a timely manner. Thanks again, George, for your time today. Don't forget to go pick up his book. I know I'm going to go pick it up. His book's called You Can Do Anything. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar to everyone who attended today, so look for that in the next week or so. I also want to remind everyone, don't forget to sign up for the other Regional ACE webinars we have. There's one coming up Monday already, December 4th, called Embracing New Social Media. It should be really interesting. And don't forget to stop by and say hi to us at any of the regional ACE conferences. We'll be at both the SOACE and the MPACE events in early December. So thanks again, everybody, for all your time.